As I have said, we are going to discuss a wide range of issues. Unfortunately, our session started a bit later than planned. Therefore, we might not have enough time for the detailed discussion, and 7-5 minutes for each.
Question to one of our online speakers. I think my first question goes to Dr. Taleb. Dr. Taleb, you are the author of the Black Swan, the book, which is widely read, widely popular in this part of the world. And in your book, the Black Swan is something very rare, right? But today we see that in the world there are lots of different things happening in terms of geopolitics, in terms of geoeconomics, and some people, observers, argue that what we are witnessing is the shift of the international system, geopolitical system. So we see on the one hand that the US has passed the peak of its influence. On the other hand, China is growing in terms of its significance, in terms of its influence in the world. And some even argue that this shift of hegemon, the change of hegemon, would lead to the clash between the new emerging hegemon and the old one. So my question to you is twofold. How would you personally characterize the current processes happening in the world, in the international system? And second part of the question, do you think that these processes would necessarily lead to the clash of, again, old hegemon and possibly the new hegemon?
Great. Thank you. I'm extremely honored to be here and speaking to my friends in Kazakhstan, and I wish I were there. The first thing I'd like to explain is that the Black Swan is an unpredictable event if the person cannot predict it. So in my metaphor of the Black Swan, I explained the Black Swan for the turkey is not the Black Swan for the butcher. So it depends on your understanding of events and your perspective. For example, the war, an eruption of a war, may have been a Black Swan for some, but it's not if you have a different understanding of historical events. So, which is why I keep insisting it depends on the observer. So more sophisticated observer would not be surprised by a certain class of events. So that's the first statement about the Black Swan. The second one, that in the Black Swan, I say that most of our, representation of the world is fraught with distortions. Like we tend to be swayed by anecdotes, and we tend to misunderstand what's going on because there's too much noise. At short term, we cannot absorb information properly, so we exaggerate some of its importance. So one or two examples of what's going on that's quite distorting today is that at no point in time has the world been more fair. At no point in history has the world had more equality, racial equality, gender equality, and things like that. Yet at no point in time have we had more like a sensation that this impression that the world was unfair and that there was more gender inequality. So it comes with a process. So what we have now is too much information, which sways people and make them feel that some problems are bigger than they were in the past, when in fact they're a lot better than in the past. The world today is vastly more transparent than before, yet we have the feeling that the more things are hidden from us. So concerning what's going on in the world between China and the United States, all of that, I don't look at what people say. I don't look at what government, statements by government officials. You look at what's happening on the grounds. Okay. In 1975, if some, enemy of the United States wanted to destroy its industrial capability, it would send missiles to Cincinnati, Ohio, to the industrial parts of the Northeast, perhaps a little bit in California. Okay, that was in 1975. Today, if you want to destroy the economics of the United States and its industrial capacity, where would you send the missiles? Not to the United States. You would send them to Wuhan, China, or other parts of China, because that's where the industrial capacity of the United States is located. So what we have today is a large, misperception of what's going on in the interactions. The United States and China are two. How can I say it? Are too integrated, and you can't really use arguments and representation made in the 70s. Okay, about separate countries. You have too much. They got too much. Maybe at the military level, of course, there's no coordination, but the economies are too dependent today. So I think that, and that's good news. Okay, I don't think that. I'm saying if China wants to hurt the United States, it would go and send missiles to Wuhan, right? So tell you. So what's good for China often is good for the United States and vice versa, and what's good for China is good for Kazakhstan, and what's good for the United States is good for Kazakhstan. So the world we have some kind of an environment that's unprecedented in terms of interdependencies. And this is very optimistic for the future. So I'm not worried about what people say. I look at what's going on the grounds. Another statement I would like to make is that I keep hearing the end of globalization, yet numbers from the Bank of International Settlements came out that we have never had more globalization. You see? So this is my answer to your question.
Thank you very much. I mean, I apologize for being too academic, maybe, but we have this great debates in international relations, right, between realists and realists and liberals, let's say, saying that one saying that the war is inevitable, the second saying that interdependence and globalization would prevent any kind of war, and cooperation is a better option for states. So you seem to align with the second camp to me.
Okay, I think that effectively we have two worlds today. You have one world that that's economically oriented. And China is part of it, okay? They're interested in transaction and economic transaction. And another world that's more archaic, where people are using different representation of the world, different goals. They have a different idea of how the world should be like, and that probably is Russia. Russia is more interested in prestige and matters like that than economic conditions, and that is unfortunate. But the rest of the world is pretty much interdependent, and Russia is probably a little separate because they've been in autarky, except for some of the raw materials that they export to the rest of the world, and they play a small role in the world economy. So it's it's erroneous to generalize based on the behavior of a single country when the rest of the world is integrating, and it's pretty much bottom up. It's leaderless because the economic life is really leaderless. It's driven by bottom up by the transactions rather than by some kind of centralized decision-making place.
Thank you very much. Thank you for answers. Now I would like to, I will return to you with another question in a minute. So now I would like to go to Ambassador Zhao, just to check whether the ambassador is with us. Ambassador? Yeah, great. Thank you for joining us again today. my question is about China, right? China has done a great job in terms of development in the last 40 years, in terms of economic development, technological development, scientific development, and military development. And today, I think we can refer to China as one of the biggest critiques of the existing international system. So from the Chinese perspective, what is wrong with the existing international system? And what can China offer to replace the existing international system? Ambassador?
Спасибо. Уважаемые дамы и господа, дорогие...
Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I would like to express my appreciation to the organizers for the invitation and for the opportunity to speak to the forum delegates. And I participate for the first time in the work of such a forum. Nevertheless, I know that the outcomes of the forum will be for the attention of the diplomacy and public figures, and the topics are relevant as well as the platform of the forum is used for the discussions. And I am happy that the heads of the US and the Chinese People's Republic to cooperate and to share their views. As our leader of the Communist Party of China stated, now the changes in the world, changes of the epochs and changes in the history unprecedentedly take place, and the humankind has the challenges, and the world is again at the next stage of the history. And China conducts the policy for the defense of the peace and for creation of the communities of the unified destiny for the humankind. This is not only declaration of China, it is fixed by the specific actions. If we remember very well, 9 years ago, the global economy was still suffering from the global financial crisis, and strengthening of the cooperation became an important tool for rehabilitation of the very passive global economy. And Xi Jinping, exactly here in Astana, during his state visit to Kazakhstan, gave initiative One Belt, One Way, and got the method for interrelations, for cooperation, and initiative meets the challenges of the global time, found out the painful points on the way of economic development for the more intensive development. And that's why it was approved by everyone. And now more than 140 countries joined this large-scale project, and it became the most popular public benefit. And in compliance with the report of the World Bank, by 2030, implementation of this large-scale program will make more than 500,000 people out of poverty, and Kazakhstan certainly sees the benefits of this initiative. And there are 5 railway and 8 highway connecting Europe and China, and became the transport logistical hub in the Eurasian continent. These corridors during pandemic played a huge role for the supply chains, for the activization of economies of the relative country participants. And certainly we hear some noise around this project that it will impact on the environment and there will be no jobs for the native citizens. And we know why such kind of noise is created. But I should say that none of the accusations were supported by the facts. And as it is said, according to the opinions of the experts, observers are concerned. What it is saying to us about. It is well known for us. Distinguished friends, we see that one polar world should be replaced by multipolar world that becomes more and more vivid. And this is a historical event that does not depend on the individuals, and probably nobody can resist or stop this process. And if somebody does not believe in this, he should be reminded by the law of Newton that any action will be counteracted. And multipolar world means that the global deeds should be administered by the states and equal dialogues. And there shouldn't be any domination of one country or several countries. There is no room for subordination because nobody wants to live according to somebody else's templates and lose identity or uniqueness, and should not resist the democratic reorganizations, which, according to the practice, may cause wars, degradation, and chaos. And now we hear the new term that order is based on equality. It is repeated by leaders of some countries and promoted and included into different declarations of the UN, but the author is full of doubts, cannot explain where he takes these rules, what is the essence of the rules, who drafted them and who adopted them, and finally, what is the links between these rules and the Charter of UN and the norms of international law. And we have the impression that we are imposed in order to replace the established rules of the international law without any explanation of this strange term, which will not be supported by absolute majority of the countries. And the tone of the author says that the rules were drafted not for themselves but for others, and now established practice has the paradoxic phenomenon that a pair of countries speak on behalf of the global community and pretend to be the voice of the global community. And we are concerned with this. As far as this, a couple of dozens of countries are only 12% of the total population of the Earth, and it reflects only the opinion of these 12%. And we also observe the attempts to promote narrative of democracy against autocracy, which reminds the white production of the Western mentality of people who lost the reality. And as the chairman of the Chinese political party, Xinjiang stated, the US has its own democracy and China has its own democracy. And these democracies meet with the national peculiarities of the nations. And the Chinese model is based on its historical specificity. We are proud of it. The democratic system of other country cannot be ideal for another country. It should always be developed and improved. And the Chairman Xi also noted that in the US there is capitalism, in China socialism, and both countries chose different ways of development, and these discrepancies appeared not today, and it will exist in the future. And recognition of these differences should be very important for the heads of these states. And no sense is for unification or change of the system of another country. Distinguished friends, in the recent 20th Congress of the Communist Party of China, we adopted a new program of modernization. That is the dream of our nation, of several generations of our people. And to achieve this goal, we will conduct the external policy. We will become more open for the exterior world and become reliable partners for the global community in order to promote the democratic development of China. In one word, we are for the open community. We are against protectionism. We are against the disruption of links, and we are for the equal cooperation. We are against the stupid steps of the competitors, which will certainly impact on them as well. And now we see who names the war in Ukraine, who makes money on this war, and certainly this should not be the policy of the superpowers. And China is not interested in the hegemons, and our task is only to exceed ourselves in order to give our own people the decent lives. And the US says that the permanent choice of the external enemy has no sense, and you need to look for such an enemy for yourself, for your own development, and there shouldn't be any discussions on that. As far as such problems were not created by China, you need to be busy with your own policy, internal policy, and do not interfere with the internal affairs of any country. And Mr. Xi talked to President Biden about Taiwan issue as well, which is the internal policy of our country. And the red line number 1 should not be crossed. Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador, for your speech. And these are applauds to you. And you touched a lot of topics. Some of them are very comprehensive, and it is worthy of discussions for hours. But maybe my mini provocative question will be that China is not interested in domination in the world, but historically all super countries usually used this narrative that whatever we offer to the world is good, and we bring civilization, we bring the benefits to the people, and only good things can be offered by us. That could also be in the Roman Empire, in the British Empire, and can be related to the US as well, as hegemon of the recent time. In this context, why China should be different, as far as we see that some countries have such questions to the policy of China. And in some countries, in different regions of the world, some segments of the population also would like to ask questions to China, and why the countries should believe that China, as growing or already established superpower, should have different goals than the previous superpowers and empires. Yes, you listed several empires which behaved in the way of superpowers in history. I'd like to note that China, in this regard, looks different and differs from other superpowers and empires. In this regard, I'd like to ask a question to you, the same question. Could you give at least one example of China that offended anybody in the history? Maybe you will give no example like this. Or maybe any participants of forum can give such an example. Maybe in your memory there is no example like that in the history of China, for 5,000 of Chinese civilization, when they attacked anybody, any country, this is just a fact. Thank you. Thank you very much. This was the ambassador of China to Kazakhstan, Mr. Zhang Xiao. Now I'd like to turn to the speakers of our stage. Mr. Tukumov, Yerkin, you see that there are very many conflicts in the world. In your view, could these problems be solved within the current system of the international security? Or maybe some dramatic changes should be done, or maybe the new system should be built in order to solve all these issues from the scratch? Thank you. Thank you very much. First, I'd like to greet all the delegates of the forum. Very interesting event, and we are doing a huge step ahead in understanding where we are moving to, what kind of Kazakhstan we'd like to build, and what are the external factors for that. I'd like to say that international contradictions and international law is developed irrelationally or irrespective of whether there are contradictions between the countries or not. It is developed as internet develops, and the space stopped to be the prerogative of one state only. That's why this is the field for discussions, for promotion of new agendas and international rules. As for the conflicts, unfortunately, humans are not perfect. There were conflicts, there are conflicts, and there will be conflicts. And I will give one example. For 2022, in the world, 27 international conflicts happened between different countries, and they were split into three categories: one worsening, one category frozen, and one improving. And what do you think? How many conflicts are in the category of improving? 0. And it says that it's very easy to start a conflict and it's hard to make it over. If we're talking about conflict in Ukraine, whatever serious strategies or forecasts we build, we need to know that there are countries with their own agendas. And there are black swans of Mr. Taleb, as well as other forecasts that are not black swans. They were predicted long ago. Experts were speaking about that, but nobody listened to their opinions. As for the question whether we need to change the international law or should not do this, such contradictions, there are very many of them, that the world can be turned over. If this is the case, then we need to make our system of international law adapted to the current realities. And the issue of each adaptation should take place on the completion of the big wars and international conflicts like Westphal system and Yalta's conference we need to wait until a new war starts in order to regulate these conflicts, and the next war may become the last one. And some weeks we already saw that the chances were 1 to 6 that the war in Ukraine will be shifted into the nuclear phase, and we should not be comforting ourselves that this will be only tactical weapons be used. In any case, it will have very dramatic effects on all the agreements and on international law.
When we say that we need to change the law, we shall understand that we don't need to wait. The world voice is important, but the voice of such countries as Kazakhstan is also important, so we can come up with our own agenda. For a long time, Kazakhstan was criticized. It was criticism inside as well for multivectoral policy. They were saying almost in a negative way, but 2022 showed that our external strategy is the only right one if we want to stay as a sovereign state. Today, we already mentioned that multivectoral policy, it's geopolitical neutrality, non-engagement, and so on. It's one of the subjects for our intellectual community to think of new terms, new realities for Kazakhstan's external policy. Therefore, Oljas organized such forum in such a critical time when this Sunday are elections, and we are electing not just a person but the future for the next period is a very critical 7 years for Kazakhstan, and we shall understand that such forums and such intellectual platforms should be more. And now we need to discuss not only about the desired pictures in the future, but also threats, real threats, external and internal. Therefore, I welcome this forum. As a director of the Institute of Strategic Research, I'm ready to share. We are not so many, just 20 million people, and we now need to be together. I think it's high time to join our intellectual efforts to understand our future. Thank you. Thank you. Continuing this topic, I'm as a researcher engaged in external policy, geopolitics in Central Asia, always heard criticism and rebuke from other economists, from other colleagues, political scientists, that in external policy of Kazakhstan everything is steady. In 30 years there was no big event. Everything is always steady. You can always speak in advance that this is boring. I've heard about it many times. In 2022, we see that in external policy we have a lot of different processes. To your mind, Kazakhstan is now in 2022. You said that in the world there are 27 different conflicts. Which one of those conflicts would concern us directly or indirectly that we shall pay attention to, or we could assist the resolvement of those conflicts if we have resources and political will? That's a question to me. Well, you know, drawing a scenario is unthankful work. There is always a margin between astrology and physics. You need to have a clear methodology. We are stronger with our methodology. In 1964, which is a relevantly new, there was an interesting survey. How do you see the world in 2020? And now we are in 2022. We can see if it was right or wrong. According to this forecast, it's in 1980, we were to land on Mars. In 1999, we had to open a military base in Moon. In 2020, we were to launch land on plutonium planet. This is about astronomy and astrology. Fortunately, less and less forecasts, but some part of citizens, they start their day with astrology. Well, that's there, right? But if to be serious and talk about the negative forecasts, of course, there are negative forecasts, and the most dangerous scenario for Kazakhstan is when world powers force middle and small countries take the side. This is the most dangerous scenario. And Kazakhstan, which has strategically very good relationships with the European Union and with the US and with China, and when you have to choose sides. We cannot afford to take sides. It's a question to our sovereign development, our journey, and our survival as a whole. Therefore, we shall have our own voice to what is happening. Well, the question is, if last time you were at the session, how you describe in one word? I would describe the current situation as strategic uncertainty. That's not bad, that's not good. The speed of changes in the world has changed a lot. It would take hundreds of years, and now it's not one generation, but just inside one generation. If the wheel was invented several thousand years ago, now just putting suitcase on a wheel happened recently, not so long ago. And iPhones, it's almost as a collapse of Soviet Union, the same effect. 10, 20 years ago, nobody could think that we can do anything with iPhone. I will give you an example. When I came to guest with my younger son, there was a phone, there was a landline, and I couldn't explain what it is. My son still didn't understand that this is phone and what it is for. I think to his son, he won't be able to explain what is iPhone. You know how fast the changes are taking place. When we talk about the strategy of Kazakhstan in such uncertain, unstable world, we shall understand. During the first session, we were told that we shouldn't change the strategy so often. I do agree with that, but we need to adjust faster because the change, the speed of the change cannot be forecasted. A lot of points of dislocation that we need to be ready to any scenarios, and I've told many times publicly, we are short of expertise and knowledge on different countries. We don't have centers on China, center on Russia, or even center on Central Asia. We don't know well our close Central Asia. Thank you. But this needs to be joint activity. Even Kazakhstan Institute of Strategic Research won't be able to do it because it's a joint work and it's time to do some actions. We've been talking about 30 years, but the courage is still not moving. And it's intellectual curiosity how Uzbeks are living, and the issue of the national security. We shall know the lives of our neighbors better. We know the life of our neighbors, we better build our life. And when I'm asked about the strategic points, we are absolutely interested in cooperation in Central Asia. I'm often discussing with think tanks, and people say, Kazakhs, you are cool, you are great. We know that you are leaders in Central Asia, but when you say about together theory, it's When you are as a region, you are even more stronger. And I stop audience to use such terms. The best, we are the leaders in Central Asia. Don't use that. We are the best, we are the leaders. Don't use that term. Let's land. We are just like Kyrgyz, Uzbeks, and Russians and Americans. We are not better and we are not worse. In many places, we are much more advanced, but let's look straight. Some values that they have, we have lost, and on the contrary, we have degraded, deteriorated. Our better side shall be shown in our deeds and not in our loud words. Thank you, Mr. Tukumov, for your response.
I would like to return to our online speakers. Dr. Taleb, are you with us? Dr. Taleb, my question is to you, the next question. So your theory proposes that systems do not need predictability, stability. Otherwise, they become fragile, inflexible. So if we relate this to the international system, how do you think, what kind of system is the most stable, most predictable, unipolar, multipolar, or maybe bipolar?
Well, I mean, all systems can have their weaknesses, but I think that a well-distributed decision-making will make for long-term stability, and effectively will try to integrate stressors into some kind of improvement. And what we're witnessing today in the world is some stressors, and these stressors are leading to, I guess, probably some short-term degradations, but long-term improvement. Europe, for example, is sort of like leaderless, doesn't have a very strong leader, and that's a quality, because a good system should not have a strong leader. Only a weak system needs to have a strong leader. And like you take one, for example, if you take Switzerland as a country, at a level of a country, nobody knows who the president is, and it's probably the most stable country in history, and probably the most the one that's going to be the most robust in the future. So I'm giving an idea what's going on. I think distributed decision making. Now, bipolar world, I don't really believe that geopolitics matter as much as transactions. You see, I'm a business person. I'm a trader, former trader, and I look at the bottom line. I don't look at statements made by governments. I think the economics are driving the system, and what we have in the West. What I mean in the West is the West taken as a whole, and I'm sure Kazakhstan would consider itself part of that West. What we have in the West currently today is more like institutions than leaders. And these institutions are robust enough and adaptive enough to be able to absorb shocks and do something out of it, improve from these shocks. So distributed decision-making is a lot better. And the United States is a big economic bloc, but the boundary between the United States, Europe, Canada, Mexico is getting fuzzy because of these interactions. We really live in a different world today. We live in a world of interdependence, economic interdependence, and even sometimes if government claims that there's a bipolarity, there's two big poles that hate one another, that's not true. It is just a cosmetic rather than deep. And I'd like to continue that way. It's not, not all countries want to integrate in that kind of economic environment, but we've never had more immigration than before, more than today.
Thank you very much. Теперь я бы хотел еще раз обратиться к господину.
Now I would like to talk to Mr. Ambassador. Mr. Ambassador, in your speech you said that China always supports globalization, trade, international trade. However, for almost 2 years on the border of Kazakhstan and China, there are disruptions with the trade. Export, import is complicated somehow, and China is a big trade economic partner for Kazakhstan, and this is a significant topic for Kazakhstan. In this regards, my question to you, could we hope that this issue soon will be resolved, and what are the problems that arise on the border? Is it economic purely, or is it geopolitical aspect, and could we hope that trade between two countries will again be at its full scale and force? I want to say economic issues, it's purely economic. There is no geopolitics, as some people and observers claim and analyze. I will explain. First of all, you know that due to very stringent anti-COVID measures from China on the border, on the passing points, on the border points, there are also restrictions. And what is happening 2 years or 1 year ago was primarily related to COVID restrictions and more stringent rules. It is also high growth of export of China to foreign countries. Therefore, this situation is observed not only Kazakhstan-China border, but practically borders between China and Russia, Mongolia, and its southern neighbors. The same situation can be observed. In the conditions of pandemic, the demand for Chinese commodities, Chinese goods multiple times increased, but the infrastructure in the border is the same, hasn't changed. Therefore, infrastructure was built 10, 15, even 20 years ago. It cannot catch up. It is not able to cope with this fast growth of export from China. That's why we have this situation in hand. It's good that Kazakhstan and China treat this issue responsibly, with understanding towards each other, and it's being resolved. The situation is getting better. I'm in constant contact with the sectoral authorities, with the authorities of Kazakhstan, and I can assure everyone that the situation has significantly improved, and I believe most likely won't have the same situation in the future. Thank you, Mr. Ambassador, for clarification. Indeed, we believe that in future we see improvement of situation on the border and probably updating the infrastructure that will help to revive the trade with China, and it's very relevant given the fact what is happening between Ukraine and Russia. We need alternative routes of delivery and supplies. And now let's turn back to our audience. And our question is to Mr. Satybayev. We've talked about the multipolar, unipolar, polypolar world, and Mr. Ambassador also said when we talk about different polarities, we usually mean China and US. To your mind, what are other points and dots that will compose this multipolarity? What other countries will share the responsibility for global security? Thank you. Thank you for a question, and thank you for the invitation. We are a small country, less than 20 million, and therefore it's important to gather the expertise in geopolitical risks, given the fact in the situation Kazakhstan finds itself from the global risk of view and the changes about the multipolarity. Multipolarity is dubious, subjective. Often this narrative is promoted by countries that would like to have the status of the leader. We had unipolarity after 90s when US was not competing. They were superpower, and all other countries they were fitting into the order, the liberal order that they were building. Now situation has changed, and Mr. Ambassador of China mentioned that China is shaping its area for impact through the One Belt, One Road, through different economic initiatives, and not only exporting its technology of the processing and collecting big data and becoming the leader in technology, in safety, in security. And as for the security, the last state visit of Chairman Xi to Kazakhstan was once more the event and occasion when security was raised again at a new level.
As for the other centers, it's clear that in speculative atmosphere, the status of Turkey is being discussed, that could also willing to dominate in the Central Asia. I think this is speculation only, and Turkey may become the main balancing player in the region for other stakeholders. And it's clear that there is Russia that will never leave this region. For this country, we are the issue of strategic security. That's why it will be present here, irrespective of the end of Ukrainian collision. And whether it will bring to dramatic or disaster, we certainly cannot exclude different escalation of the conflicts. Moreover, the last events, that what happened on the border with Poland, and we heard statements of Biden, Erdogan, and others who warned us not to be too fast with the conclusions. We should analyze this, and for America, the unwilling outcome could be emerging of NATO into the conflict. Maybe they will just transfer some anti-missile weapons, and probably there will be no catastrophe for Russia. And Russia will try to keep the capacity of influence, and I would not be in a rush to take Russia out of our attention. And what about other centers of force? They are not able to project their influence. And European Union is a very fragile unification of several states that do not have the unified policy, especially in the military essence. They still do not have any armed forces for the EU. I don't want to argue with you. Let us fix that the EU was not able to develop their international and military security. Every state just pulls the blanket on itself. And Schulz now also gave an incorrect signal to China and went with Macron to hedge its risks, and it's clear that every country strives to keep the market of China for themselves, and moreover losing the mineral resources from Russia. And I'd like to underline one very important thing, and we discussed the international law today. We cannot impact on the international law in any way, as far as international law is formed based on the policy and ideology of the superpowers that form this system. Others try to be in compliance with it, and multipolar world will mean the risks being beyond the limits we are used to. And if every country will be based on its own logics and understand how it will be developed with the hard power, what we see now in Ukraine, in one way, application of the military force for solving their strategical tasks. What Russia did probably would be followed by other countries in many regions, and that's why for Kazakhstan the key issue will be the tough security. And our military industrial complex is very small. We need other elements of tough security in order not to become easy target for other military countries. That's why we need to be ready for other scenarios, not only from superpowers. And there is a saying, you'd like to keep peace, you should be ready for war. And let us recognize that you just touched a lot of issues, and the question I'd like to ask to Mr. Tukumov, you were talking about Ukraine. What other potential conflicts could happen and directly impact on Kazakhstan? Briefly, with thesis 2 to 4, what we need to pay attention to. The key region for our security would be water resources and lack of water resources, and there could be also conflicts with our neighbors, like you see, Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan already are in conflict, and destruction of the structures that can happen in hours, and escalation of the conflicts was done down, but we cannot guarantee that it could transfer into a wider conflict. And we see risks of escalation around Ukraine. And if any missile hits European countries and hits some strategical objects, then NATO also could use its means against Russia. There are a lot of uncontrolled risks, and if we talk about some of them, like Southern Caucasus, Iran, which may spill over with its effects on us, immigration, radiation, and Ukraine now has the global meaning, and we cannot control, but certainly will have the direct impact on us. And our neighbors could also start war. Yesterday we heard that several missiles just hit Poland, and the whole world now keep tracks what will happen further on, how countries will behave. This was Yerzhan Satybayev. Now let us talk to Aibek Barysov, chairman of Association of Defense and Industrial Complex Enterprises. We were talking about the military technologies, and we saw in 2021, when the war was in Karabakh, and Bayraktars were there. And we're talking about Ukraine a lot. And so what is your view? What will be the best way to be ready for geopolitical instability? What we do in Kazakhstan, what we should do, and what else we are doing now? First of all, I'd like to greet the forum. Thank you very much for the invitation to the forum. And the previous speaker was talking talking about necessity to strengthen the defense capability, and I will disclose a big secret. We have the defense and industrial complex, and during 30 years we survived irrespective of any support not provided to us, and what should happen in order to attract attention to us. There are some things that we cannot disclose, like within the state secret framework, but we are the industry that is a specific part of the defense capability of the country, and we need to change the attitude to it. And the citizens of Kazakhstan should not think like I am by myself. And there are some factories I don't want to know about are doing something for the defense capability of the country. And I am in this business more than 10 years, and there are some military forces that should defend us from any conflicts. There is a Minister of Defense, and also this is his job to protect me. And frankly speaking, such kind of mentality is in place, and we have the defense industrial complex, and we are the remnants of that huge complex that existed in the Soviet Union. And like military wheel vehicles, we produce some top trucks for that, and this was described by our IT experts, and all the copyright belongs to us as well. And when we are talking about armaments, and this is something like our government likes to write concepts for 10 or to 15 years, and let it be some very popular phrase that if we do not feed our own army, we will feed somebody else's army. And I am talking as experienced person. We did transfer of the top technologies, and we are in the top 5 in regards to the wheel military vehicles. And we produce radio stations, and our IT just produces IT software for such kind of vehicles. And these are not crazy money, not billions of dollars. And when we look at the agricultural industry, we are amazed what kind of subsidies are allocated to this sector. And what we heard in the previous session, that we are building super house for our nation, and there will be a lot of rooms, but there is no entrance door to this house, or there is a door, but it is a weak one. You may just penetrate into this house via windows. We need to rearm in a quick way, and with the diplomatic staff, as well as with the smart government, and having the army fully equipped, we will be okay. And the follow-up question, what we need for the army or for the defense? Briefly, we need specific attention of the commander-in-chief, and there are critical aspects or moments when the president should pay attention to our military industrial complex. And so far, there is genocide of the national producer. Unfortunately, not only in our industry, but in other sectors as well. And I am talking about that. It is the strategical sector, and in a maximum way we need to produce in our country. And maybe it is it looks funny, and many ministers laugh at that. And we have an opportunity to transfer, and I compare our industry with our vehicle machinery industry. We may do it like Israel did, with cheap money, but we need to trust in the government. And as of today, all the agencies we work with, they are not trustworthy, and there are specific questions to them. Thank you. Thank you very much. Now, we have discussed a lot of issues that are in geopolitical or military aspect. Now, we have only 10 to 15 minutes left. Let us talk about economic issues. And I would like to talk to Mr. Taleb.
We've been discussing a lot of things, issues in the geopolitical kind of dimension, military dimension. Now I would like to talk briefly about the economic problems that we may face in the upcoming future. So you talk a lot about the black swans, right? And we've seen some of those black swans in geopolitics. In your opinion, what kind of black swans we can expect in the geoeconomics? So what kind of difficulties we may face or we should be prepared for in the upcoming future?
These are actually white swans, not black swans. So much, the difficulty we are going to be facing now is that quantitative easing, the last 15 years in the United States and Europe, and other countries as well, but mostly started in the United States, Britain, and the EU. The quantitative easing has led to a lot of distortions in inflation and asset values worldwide. So you put interest rates at zero, and a lot of what I call tumors start to come out, like Bitcoin was one of the tumors, cryptos, things that are entirely speculative, dressed up as as tools with economic value. In fact, with no valid economic value. So you have, and then you also have this asset inflation, not inflation, asset inflation. Real estate values have increased worldwide by about between 100 and 150 trillion dollars. So all that from cheap interest rates. And now we discovered that policy of cheap interest rates is no longer possible. So we have an entire generation of bankers, people who are now 40, 42 years old, who have never really seen interest rates. And so we don't have the skills to face the new environment, which is going to be, no easy money, no more easy money, because easy money, of course, leads to problems. We have a lot of debt, and unfortunately, asset values are going to be under a lot of pressure. So this is a new environment. I think we're going to end up a lot better off. It's going to be a lot healthier. But we have to learn so that the new environment is going to have some bumps, some real bumps. But think about it. Mortgage rates in America were under 3% at some point. Now they're over 7%. So it means the value of a house is more than twice more expensive to carry. It means that roughly interest, rates should lead housing prices to go down by almost half. So the same applies will apply to Europe once they start, they catch up with U.S. policy, and I'm sure will generalize and have spillovers worldwide. So this is a big challenge. This, to me, is vastly more important than all the other things. When I talk about anti-fragile, I say that sometimes some stressors improve the system. I think that what's happening in Ukraine is probably going to accelerate the energy independence of European countries. We have seen that a similar stressor in 1973 with the oil embargo. So the oil embargo of 73 led to adaptation in Europe and the United States, where a precipitous drop in consumption of energy consumption, much better than expected. It compressed very quickly, and as a matter of fact, it led to a glut of oil prices that bankrupted the Soviet Union. If you remember, in the 80s, oil prices went down to the point where it was no longer sustainable for many countries to maintain the old way of doing business. So I think that's on a positive side, that we're going to have energy independence thanks to the trigger of the Russian gas story and other similar things that have been happening worldwide in the energy sector. But overall, I think that the road is going to be bumpy, and we're going to be better off. We were very fragile with interest rates at zero. We're going to learn to be more robust with real interest rates. And that, to me, is a big news. There's nothing else is more important than this. Interest rates at 4% in the 2 years, 4.2% in the 2 years, is something that's going to lead to a lot of bumps.
Great. Thank you very much for your question. Продолжая тему, которую...
Thank you. As for economic growth, I would like to address Mr. Sultanov, Ruslan. We see some factors that are beyond Kazakhstan and can affect economic situation because Kazakhstan is a part of the world economy. We talked about COVID, and we see that now with the war in Ukraine, we see some indirect challenges, the pressure on the economy of Kazakhstan. In this regards, I would like to ask to what extent we are ready to economic challenges if the situation with the geopolitics deteriorates, and what we need to do to be well prepared. Thank you for the question. One answer is not possible. Geopolitical conditions have changed so much that giving one answer or forecast that the world economy will be this way cannot be done by anyone. Today we, at the first session, discussed the main questions. What is the reason of many problems? And one of the main messages was the trust. Trust that we are all talking about, even colleagues were about the armed forces. The trust comes with the transparency. If there is a transparency and you can see how decisions are made, then there will be trust. Strategically, we have all written, we have a national strategy of the security, national security, that shows what needs to be done with certain scenarios, what actions should be taken in the process and in the speediness of making decisions. When a certain negative event, adverse event or geopolitical tension starts, we have two ways. Either we live in this tense world or there is a deterioration. And in any scenario, there needs to be plan B. Plan B is available. I think it exists. Most importantly is speediness of making decisions. It's work on debureaucratization. The work needs to be done fast. It cannot take 6 months or a year, because decreasing extra chains and links in making decision, transparency in decision making, it affects the trust. The third is responsibility that we were talking about. If the managers, if the heads of the local authorities, central authorities are afraid of responsibility, and all always prone to coordinate and harmonize, we will be failing and will be losing. In 2020, we had the experience when there was such mobilization economy, when decision-making was up to one or two links or chains. Why am I talking about the decision-making and bureaucratic things? Because economic capacity is strong of the country. If we look at the situations that is happening in the world, the inequality is increasing and it will be deteriorating. Many countries will have problems with access to commodities, to the food commodities, to the resources, and we have these elements as well. We shall use it properly, and even with the food security will be taking long some decisions, and it takes up to 1 year to adopt certain rules. We will lose everywhere and will be late everywhere. Therefore, decision-making, fast decision-making is the main criteria. It needs to be fast, it needs to be transparent, and it needs to be done responsibly. Those are the elements that shall be addressed, and then our economic capacity will be used at its full scale, and we will be able not only live with the minimum losses out of this geopolitical situation, but also maybe acquire some advantages. Thank you for your opinion.
Questions that you can ask. I mean, we can spend hours on this topic, important topics. But I would like to ask the last question, and this question goes to Mr. Taleb again. So again, Kazakhstan is not a big country in terms of its geopolitical influence, and Kazakhstan neighbors two nuclear powers, Russia and China, and we see that this cooperation or the relationship between big powers is getting kind of more intense. And in this context, how do you think will Kazakhstan be able to maintain its multi-vector foreign policy in the future?
Okay, I'm not a specialist of geopolitics, but I will say something about the Silk Road, being on a Silk Road, that Kazakhstan is a country that was located in the most important part of the globe before the discovery of America by Europeans, and that was what the center of the world was. And it looks like this is economically, that's what the center of the world is going back to. So being on it's critical to be on the Silk Road, and I don't think that geopolitics matter much for the welfare of Kazakhstan. So long as you preserve your institution, you have you protect, your merchants. You have good ways of doing business. You're in a very strategic position, and you can benefit from everything. I would not put too much trunk on geopolitics, and the economics are such that it's going to be rosy, and you're part of practically the country that the most part of. The cornerstone country, that you're part of Europe and part of Asia, and that will have a lot more importance. Think about the volume, the volume of transaction between Asia and Europe keeps increasing. So that's the way I view things in Kazakhstan, ignoring all these geopolitical things that are effectively cosmetic, largely cosmetic.
Thank you very much for your opinion.
Maybe not 100% cosmetic, but people overestimate the role of geopolitics and underestimate the role of the transaction at the city level.
Thank you very much, and we really hope that at some point in upcoming years we'll stop talking about geopolitics and we're talking about more cooperation, about different kinds of relations in different sectors, and we will be less talking about the conflicts in different parts of the world. Thank you very much for participating.
With that, I close our session. I would like to thank separately our speakers, Dr. Taleb, I would like to thank you. Mr. Ambassador, His Excellency, thank you. And our speakers in the audience. I would like to conclude with one more thing. Mr. Tukumov just said initially, and I agree fully, when we talk about external policy, we are struggling to find Kazakh experts. We don't have so many experts on China. Those who know Russia well, you can count it on one hand with the fingers of the one. Therefore, expert forums, expert circles, and expert discussions are very good things. So I would like once more to thank for organizing this forum, and I hope there will be more of such in the future. And I wish the fruitful discussion for next sessions. Thank you.